The luxury hotel manager laughed when Keanu Reeves walked up to the front desk and quietly asked, "What's the cheapest room you have tonight?" Several guests nearby turned their heads. The question sounded strange inside one of New York City's most expensive hotels. The manager looked Keanu up and down. His jacket was wet from the rain. His boots looked worn. He carried no designer luggage, no signs of wealth. The manager smirked. Then he said loudly enough for half the lobby to hear, "Sir, our guests spend more on breakfast than that room costs." Laughter broke out around the front desk. A businessman chuckled. A woman waiting for the elevator shook her head. Even a few hotel employees looked uncomfortable. The manager folded his arms. "You sure you're in the right place?" More laughter followed. Anyone else might have become angry. Anyone else might have walked away. But Keanu didn't. He simply smiled. "I just need a room for the night." That calm answer somehow made the manager laugh even harder. What nobody in that lobby knew was that the quiet man standing in front of them wasn't there by accident. And before the night was over, the same manager who mocked him would wish he could take every word back. Because less than an hour later, someone would walk through those hotel doors and completely change the situation. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about kindness, justice, and unexpected life lessons, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's begin. Rain hammered the streets of Manhattan. The storm had arrived without warning. Strong winds pushed water across the sidewalks. Yellow taxicabs splashed through puddles. Most people hurried indoors. But one man walked calmly through the rain, alone. His dark jacket was soaked. His boots were wet. His hair clung slightly to his forehead. Yet he didn't seem bothered. The man was Keanu Reeves. And tonight, he wasn't looking for attention. He was simply looking for a place to sleep. Across the street stood one of the most prestigious hotels in New York City, the Grand Crescent Hotel, a five-star landmark known for hosting celebrities, politicians, and billionaires. Its massive glass entrance glowed against the dark night. Luxury cars lined the curb. Bellhops rushed back and forth, carrying expensive luggage. Inside, crystal chandeliers filled the lobby with warm golden light. Everything about the hotel whispered wealth. People didn't come here looking for affordable rooms. They came here to be seen, to impress, to show status. Keanu stepped through the revolving doors. Immediately, warm air replaced the cold rain outside. Several guests glanced toward him. Most looked away quickly. A few continued staring, not because they recognized him, because they didn't. To them, he looked like a tired traveler who had wandered into the wrong place. Near the front desk stood Jason Miller, the hotel's front desk manager, 41 years old. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect hair. Jason took pride in appearances, especially in a hotel like this. To him, appearance meant everything. The moment he saw Keanu enter, he made a judgment. This guy can't afford to be here. The thought appeared instantly, without hesitation, without evidence, just assumption. Jason watched Keanu approach the counter, the soaked jacket, the worn boots, the simple backpack slung over one shoulder. Nothing about him matched the hotel's usual clientele. Jason forced a professional smile, though it wasn't entirely genuine. "Good evening, sir." Keanu returned the smile. "Good evening." Jason tapped his keyboard. "How can I help you tonight?" Keanu glanced briefly around the magnificent lobby, then asked politely, "What's the cheapest room you have available?" The question seemed to freeze the space around them. A nearby businessman looked up. A woman standing beside the elevators turned her head. Even one of the bellhops paused. Jason blinked, then laughed, not loudly, but loudly enough. "Cheapest room." Keanu nodded. "Yes." Jason smirked. "Sir, our guests spend more on breakfast than that room costs." Several people laughed. A businessman chuckled openly. A woman shook her head. Someone whispered something to their companion. The embarrassment spread quickly. Keanu simply stood there, calm, patient, unbothered. Jason expected him to leave. Most people would have. Most people would have felt humiliated. Instead, Keanu smiled politely. "I only need a room for the night." Jason folded his arms. "You sure you're in the right place?" More laughter. More stares. The lobby suddenly felt less welcoming. Yet Keanu remained completely composed. That calmness irritated Jason, because it refused to give him the reaction he expected. A young receptionist named Emily sat nearby. She had witnessed the entire exchange, and she didn't like it. Not one bit. She glanced at Keanu, then at Jason. Something felt wrong. Customers deserved respect. All customers. Regardless of how they looked, Jason continued typing, slowly, very slowly, as if helping Keanu was the least important thing he could be doing. Finally, he looked up. There is one room left in the older wing. His tone made it sound like a punishment. The smallest room in the hotel. Keanu nodded. That'll be fine. Jason seemed surprised. No complaint. No argument. No frustration. Just gratitude. Fine. Jason began processing the reservation. Around them, the luxury hotel continued buzzing with activity. Guests checked in. Suitcases rolled across marble floors. Concierges assisted wealthy travelers. But every few minutes, someone glanced back toward the quiet man at the counter. Something about him seemed familiar, not enough to recognize, not yet, just enough to create curiosity. As Jason handed over the room key, he couldn't help making one final comment. Next time you might have better luck at a budget motel. A few nearby guests laughed again. Emily looked down. Embarrassed, Keanu simply accepted the key card, then smiled. Thank you. Those two words somehow made Jason feel even more uncomfortable. Because kindness is difficult to mock. And before the night was over, that simple kindness would change everything. But for now, nobody in the Grand Crescent Hotel knew that. Not Jason, not Emily, not the guests laughing in the lobby, and certainly not the people about to discover exactly who their newest guest really was. Jason watched Keanu walk away from the front desk. The manager expected him to complain. Most guests did, especially when assigned to the older wing of the hotel. The rooms there were smaller, the views were worse, and the elevators moved painfully slowly. Yet Keanu simply picked up his backpack and headed toward the elevator without a single complaint. That irritated Jason. For some reason, the man's calm attitude made him uncomfortable. Nearby, Emily finished helping another guest and quietly approached the front desk. "What room did you give him?" she asked. Jason barely looked up. "Room 214. Emily frowned. "The maintenance floor?" Jason shrugged. "It's available." Emily lowered her voice. "There were better rooms open." Jason smirked. "For paying customers." Emily stared at him. "He is a paying customer." Jason returned to his computer. Technically. The comment bothered Emily, more than she wanted to admit, because tonight wasn't the first time Jason judged someone based on appearance, but it might have been the worst. Meanwhile, Keanu stepped into the elevator. A wealthy couple entered behind him. The husband glanced at Keanu's wet jacket, then looked away. The wife whispered something. Both laughed quietly. Keanu pretended not to notice. He simply stared at the elevator numbers, patient, calm. The doors opened. Room 214 sat at the very end of a long hallway. The carpet was older, the lighting dimmer. The area felt completely different from the luxury suites advertised on the hotel's website. Still, Keanu smiled. A room was a room. That was enough. Back downstairs, Jason continued telling the story. A bellhop approached the desk. "What happened with that guy?" Jason laughed. "You mean the one looking for the cheapest room in the hotel?" The bellhop smiled. "Yeah." Jason shook his head. "I thought he was joking." A nearby concierge laughed. Another employee joined the conversation. Soon several staff members were listening, and every time Jason told the story, the details became slightly more insulting. The stranger seemed poorer. The request seemed stranger. The situation seemed funnier. Across the lobby, Emily listened silently. She hated gossip, especially when the customer wasn't there to defend himself. A few minutes later, the front doors opened again. Rain blew inside. Several wealthy guests entered carrying designer luggage. One of them stopped at the front desk. A man in an expensive suit, probably worth millions. Jason immediately transformed. His smile became bigger. His voice became friendlier. His attention became absolute. "Welcome back, Mr. Reynolds." The businessman smiled. "Good to see you again." Within seconds, Jason upgraded his room, arranged complimentary services, offered free dining vouchers. Emily watched the interaction. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One guest received respect before speaking. Another received ridicule for asking a simple question. The difference wasn't character, it was appearance. About 30 minutes later, Keanu returned to the lobby. The vending machines on his floor were empty. He simply wanted a bottle of water. As he walked toward the small convenience area near the front desk, several people looked at him. Again, not because they recognized him, not yet, but because he stood out. He seemed completely comfortable in a place obsessed with status. And somehow that made people curious. Jason noticed him immediately. "Oh," his voice carried across the lobby. "Back already?" Several guests turned. Keanu smiled politely. The vending machine was empty, Jason laughed. The premium floors don't have that problem. A few guests smiled. One man chuckled. The comment hung in the air. Another unnecessary jab. Keanu simply nodded. I'll keep that in mind. Then he walked toward the convenience area. Emily shook her head. She couldn't believe Jason was still doing this. A few minutes later, she quietly approached Keanu. Sir, Keanu looked up. Yes? Emily handed him a complimentary bottle of water. You shouldn't have to pay for this. Keanu smiled warmly. That's very kind, Emily smiled back. You're welcome. Before she could say anything else, Jason appeared. Almost instantly, Emily. His tone was sharp. She turned. What? Jason crossed his arms. We don't give away complimentary items without approval. Emily frowned. It's a bottle of water. Jason didn't care. The issue wasn't the water. The issue was that she had helped the guest he wanted everyone else to ignore. I'll handle guest services. Emily stared at him. Clearly, Jason's jaw tightened. Keanu sensed the tension immediately. It's okay. He accepted the bottle. Thank you both. Again, polite, respectful, calm. Emily smiled. Jason looked annoyed. Because every time Keanu responded kindly, Jason looked worse. And deep down, he was beginning to realize it. Yet, instead of stopping, he doubled down. Later that evening, several guests gathered near the lobby bar. The conversation eventually turned toward the strange man staying in room 214. The man who asked for the cheapest room. The story had spread surprisingly fast. One guest laughed. Who stays at a luxury hotel and asks for the cheapest room? Another shrugged. Maybe he's lost. Several people laughed. Jason happened to overhear. Rather than ending the conversation, he joined it. You should have seen him. The group smiled. Jason continued. I honestly thought he walked into the wrong building. More laughter followed. Across the lobby, Emily heard every word. And so did someone else. An elderly woman sitting alone near the fireplace. She looked toward Keanu, then toward Jason. Her expression changed. Not amusement, disappointment. The woman quietly watched everything. A new witness. Someone paying attention. Someone who didn't approve. Meanwhile, Keanu sat near the lobby window reading a newspaper, completely unaware that he had become the evening's favorite topic. Or perhaps he was aware, and simply didn't care. Outside, the rain finally began slowing. The city lights reflected across wet streets. Inside the Grand Crescent Hotel, whispers continued spreading. The man in room 214 had become a curiosity. Some laughed at him. Some felt sorry for him. Some ignored him completely. But a few people were beginning to ask a different question. A more interesting question. Because every time they looked at him, they felt something strange, something familiar. As if they had seen him before. The feeling grew stronger with every passing minute. And before the night was over, those whispers would become something much bigger, something Jason Miller never saw coming. The rain had finally stopped. Outside, New York City's streets shimmered beneath the glow of streetlights. Inside the Grand Crescent Hotel, the evening continued as usual. Guests checked in. Employees hurried through the lobby. Suitcases rolled across marble floors. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat the quiet guest from room 214, Keanu Reeves. Most people still didn't know who he was. To them, he was simply the man who had asked for the cheapest room. But over the next hour, several people would learn something far more important than his name. They would learn who he was as a person. Near the fireplace, the elderly woman who had witnessed Jason's behavior earlier slowly stood from her chair. She leaned heavily on her cane. In one hand, she carried a handbag. In the other, a small shopping bag. As she turned toward the lobby exit, one of the bags slipped from her hand. Its contents spilled across the floor. Prescription bottles, reading glasses, receipts, family photographs. The woman froze. Oh dear. Several guests looked over. Most immediately looked away. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to get involved. The woman slowly bent down, but her bad knee made it difficult. Before she could reach the floor, another figure stepped forward. Keanu, without hesitation, without seeking attention, he knelt beside her. Let me help. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you. Carefully, Keanu gathered each item. One by one, he picked up the photographs, the glasses, the medication bottles. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Just kindness. When he handed over a family picture, he smiled. Beautiful family. The woman's eyes softened. My grandchildren, they look very happy. The woman smiled proudly. They are. Keanu handed her the final item, then helped her stand, slowly, carefully. The woman squeezed his hand. You're a good man. Keanu smiled. I'm just helping. Several guests witnessed the moment. including Emily. And the elderly woman wasn't the only person paying attention. Across the lobby, a young bellhop named Michael watched everything. Michael was 20 years old, hardworking, respectful, and terrified, because tonight was his first week on the job. Every mistake felt enormous. Every guest seemed intimidating, and every supervisor made him nervous, especially Jason. A few minutes later, Michael hurried across the lobby carrying 3 large suitcases. Too many, honestly. But he didn't want to appear weak. As he passed near the entrance, one suitcase slipped. The handle twisted. The luggage nearly crashed onto the marble floor. Michael caught it at the last second. Barely. Still, the sudden movement startled him. Embarrassment spread across his face. A businessman nearby rolled his eyes. Careful. Michael immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, sir." The businessman walked away without responding. Michael looked miserable. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Nice save." Michael turned. Keanu stood nearby, smiling. The young bellhop laughed nervously. "Almost lost it, but you didn't." Michael smiled. "I guess not." For a moment they simply talked. Not about work, not about mistakes, just normal conversation. Something Michael hadn't experienced much since starting the job. Eventually, Keanu asked, "First week?" Michael looked surprised. "Is it that obvious?" Keanu laughed softly. "I remember first weeks." Michael smiled, then admitted something. "I'm afraid of messing up." Keanu nodded. "Everyone is." The answer caught him off guard. Even more surprising was how genuine it sounded. "No one's perfect," Keanu continued. "The important thing is showing up and doing your best." Michael stared. Simple words, yet exactly what he needed to hear. Before leaving, Keanu shook his hand. "You're doing fine." For the first time all night, Michael believed it. That conversation stayed with him, much longer than he realized. About 20 minutes later, another small moment happened, one that most people never noticed. A housekeeper accidentally dropped a stack of folded towels near the elevators. Guests stepped around them.
No, she's not.
Nobody helped, except Keanu. Again, he quietly picked up the towels, stacked them neatly, and handed them back. The housekeeper smiled. "Thank you." Keanu nodded. "My pleasure." No audience, no applause, no attention, just respect. The same respect he offered everyone. Soon afterward, Michael returned from helping a guest. As he walked through the lobby, he noticed something folded inside his jacket pocket. Confused, he pulled it out. A $50 bill. His eyes widened. Immediately, he looked around. The only person who could have placed it there was Keanu. Michael hurried toward him. "Sir." Keanu looked up. "You left this." He held up the money. Keanu smiled. "No." Michael blinked. "What?" Keanu nodded toward him. "You've earned it." Michael shook his head. "I can't take this." "You can." The young bellhop looked emotional. "My mom's behind on rent." The words escaped before he could stop them. Keanu's expression softened. "Then maybe it'll help." Michael stared at the bill, then at Keanu, then back at the bill again. He didn't know what to say, because nobody had shown him that kind of kindness in a very long time. Eventually, he whispered, "Thank you." Keanu smiled. "You're welcome." Throughout the evening, similar moments kept happening. Keanu thanked every employee who helped him. Every receptionist, every cleaner, every bellhop, every server, every doorman. People noticed, especially because wealthy guests often ignored staff completely. Some never even looked up from their phones. Yet the man staying in the cheapest room treated everyone with dignity. Everyone. Even Jason, despite everything. When Jason handed him information about breakfast hours, Keanu simply smiled. "Thank you." No sarcasm, no resentment, no anger. Emily couldn't understand it. Most people would have demanded a manager. Most people would have filed a complaint. Most people would have fought back. Keanu never did. Not once. And that was what made him different. Not money, not fame, not status. Character. Slowly, employees began talking about him. Not the way they had before. Not with laughter. With respect. Meanwhile, guests who spent thousands of dollars per night barely noticed the workers around them. Yet the guest in room 214 remembered names, asked questions, said thank you, and somehow that mattered. By the end of the evening, something strange had happened. The man Jason viewed as the least important guest in the hotel had become one of the most respected people in the building, even though almost nobody knew who he really was, yet. And before long, another question would begin spreading through the Grand Crescent Hotel. A question that would change everything. Why does that guy look so familiar? By 9 o'clock, something unusual was happening inside the Grand Crescent Hotel. Nobody announced it. Nobody planned it. Yet a feeling had begun spreading through the building. It started with a glance, then another, then another. People kept looking at the man from room 214, the guest who asked for the cheapest room, the guest Jason had mocked in front of half the lobby, the guest who somehow treated every employee better than many of the wealthy customers staying there. Keanu sat quietly near the fireplace reading a newspaper, completely relaxed, completely unaware, or at least he appeared that way. Across the lobby, the elderly woman he had helped earlier sat with her daughter. She continued glancing toward him. Finally, she leaned closer. "I know that face." Her daughter looked up. "What face?" The woman pointed discreetly. "The gentleman by the fireplace." Her daughter glanced over. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual. Then she looked again, longer this time. A strange expression appeared. "You know," she paused, "he does look familiar." Neither woman could explain why, but suddenly they weren't the only ones thinking it. At the hotel bar, two businessmen had also noticed him. One looked toward Keanu, then toward his friend, then back again. "Am I crazy?" His friend laughed. "Probably. No, seriously." The man pointed subtly. "That guy." The friend glanced over, then stared. For several seconds. "Huh, what? I've definitely seen him somewhere." The first man nodded. "Right?" Curiosity began spreading, slowly, quietly, like a rumor moving through a crowd. Meanwhile, Emily continued working behind the front desk. Yet every few minutes she found herself looking toward Keanu. Not because of his appearance, because of his behavior. Something about him felt familiar. The kindness, the calmness, the way he carried himself. It reminded her of someone. She just couldn't figure out who. Across the lobby, Michael the bellhop approached the front desk. "Can I ask you something?" Emily looked up. "Sure." Michael lowered his voice. "You think that guy looks familiar?" Emily blinked. "You too?" Michael nodded. "Yeah." They both looked toward Keanu at the same time. And for the first time, Emily felt a strange possibility forming inside her mind. Impossible, but still possible. A few minutes later, another clue appeared. A teenage guest walked through the lobby carrying his phone. As he passed Keanu, he suddenly stopped, completely stopped, then looked back. Twice, his eyes widened. "No way." The teenager pulled out his phone, quickly, secretly. He opened an image search, then looked at Keanu, then back at his screen, then back at Keanu again. His heartbeat sped up. The resemblance was uncanny. Still, he wasn't sure. He hurried back to his parents. "Mom," his voice was excited. "What?" "I think that's Keanu Reeves." His mother laughed. "No, I'm serious." She glanced over, then immediately looked again. Longer this time. The smile disappeared from her face. Oh, now she wasn't laughing anymore. Across the room, whispers started multiplying. Guests noticed other guests staring, which caused them to stare too. Questions spread, tiny conversations, small suspicions, growing curiosity. Jason noticed it almost immediately, and he hated it, because the attention wasn't supposed to be on Keanu. It was supposed to be on the hotel. Yet every few minutes someone pointed toward the fireplace, someone whispered, someone stared. Jason rolled his eyes. "This is ridiculous." A concierge approached him. "You don't think that's actually him, do you?" Jason laughed. "No." The concierge looked uncertain. "It kinda looks like him." Jason shook his head. "Keanu Reeves isn't staying in room 214. The concierge shrugged. "I guess." Jason smirked. "Exactly." Yet his confidence felt weaker than before, because even he was beginning to notice the resemblance. Still, admitting that possibility would mean admitting something else. Something much worse. It would mean acknowledging how badly he had treated him. And Jason wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Another 30 minutes passed. The mystery continued growing. Guests walked through the lobby and immediately noticed people staring. Naturally, they stared too. One woman secretly snapped a photo. Another guest searched online. Several employees began whispering among themselves. Everywhere people asked the same question. "Who is that guy?" Then came another witness. A middle-aged man exiting the elevator. He walked past Keanu, stopped instantly, then turned around, slowly. His eyes widened. For several seconds, he simply stared. Keanu looked up politely. The man immediately looked away, almost embarrassed, then hurried toward the front desk. Jason noticed him approaching. "Good evening, sir." The man lowered his voice. "You know who that is?" Jason sighed. "No." The guest pointed toward Keanu. "That looks exactly like Keanu Reeves." Jason forced a laugh. "Trust me." The manager smiled. "It's not." The guest didn't seem convinced, not at all, and Jason knew it. Because deep down, he wasn't convinced anymore either. Emily happened to overhear the conversation. The moment the guest walked away, she opened her phone. Quietly, carefully. She searched for recent photos of Keanu Reeves, then looked toward the fireplace. Her eyes widened. The hair, the beard, the smile, the eyes. Suddenly the possibility felt very real, very real. Emily's heart began racing. Could it actually be him? Across the room, Michael experienced the same realization. He had just returned from helping another guest. As he walked through the lobby, he caught sight of Keanu smiling at an elderly couple. And something clicked. A memory. A movie. An interview. A charity event he had seen online. Michael stopped walking. No way. The words escaped before he realized it. Another employee heard him. What? Michael pointed. I think that's Keanu Reeves. The employee looked over, then froze. The rumor spread again, faster this time. Now employees were whispering. Guests were whispering. Even security staff had started paying attention. The entire hotel seemed caught between disbelief and certainty. Nobody wanted to say it loudly. Because what if they were wrong? Yet what if they were right? Near the fireplace, Keanu turned another page of his newspaper, still calm, still humble, still completely unconcerned, with the attention growing around him. Then a woman standing near the elevators gasped softly, not loudly, just enough for several people nearby to hear. She stared at her phone, then at Keanu, then back at her phone again. Oh my God. People immediately leaned closer. What? The woman swallowed, her eyes never leaving Keanu. Then she whispered the words that instantly spread through the Grand Crescent Hotel. Wait! She paused, her voice trembling slightly. Is that actually Keanu Reeves? The question moved through the lobby like electricity. And for the first time all night, Jason Miller felt something he hadn't felt before. Fear. Because suddenly, the impossible no longer seemed impossible. And the rumors were only getting started. The atmosphere inside the Grand Crescent Hotel had completely changed. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The whispers, the stares, the curiosity. The mystery surrounding the guest from room 214 had taken over the lobby. Guests who had been chatting moments earlier were now watching the same man, the quiet traveler sitting beside the fireplace. The man who had asked for the cheapest room. The man many people were beginning to suspect was actually Keanu Reeves. Jason Miller hated every second of it, because attention was supposed to focus on the hotel. Not on one guest, especially not a guest he had already decided didn't belong. Across the lobby, more phones appeared. Some guests pretended to check messages. Others secretly zoomed in on Keanu's face. A few whispered excitedly. The rumors continued growing. Jason watched it all, and the more attention Keanu received, the more irritated he became. At first he tried ignoring it, but eventually his frustration won. He stepped away from the front desk, straight toward the fireplace. Straight toward Keanu. Emily noticed immediately. Her stomach dropped. Oh no. Michael looked up. What? Emily was already moving. Jason. But Jason didn't stop. Guests noticed. Conversations slowed. People began watching. The same way people watch when they sense trouble is coming. Keanu looked up from his newspaper. His expression remained calm. Jason forced a smile. The kind that wasn't really a smile. Enjoying your stay? Keanu nodded politely. Very much. Jason folded his arms. That's surprising. Several nearby guests turned toward them. The tension became visible. Keanu simply waited. Jason continued. I didn't think our hotel would be your kind of place. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Keanu smiled softly. It's very nice, Jason laughed. Nice isn't exactly cheap. The comment hung in the air. A deliberate jab. Keanu didn't respond. Emily had almost reached them now. Jason. He ignored her. The manager's confidence grew as more people watched. An audience always made him feel powerful. And tonight he had one. A large one. We usually attract successful people. Several guests frowned. The implication was obvious. Keanu remained calm. That's good for business. A few guests actually smiled at that answer, but Jason wasn't finished. Not even close. He stepped closer. Can I ask you some? Keanu nodded. Of course. Jason looked around dramatically, making sure people were listening, making sure people were watching. Then he asked, what exactly brings you to a 5-star hotel? The lobby became quiet, very quiet. Guests stopped pretending not to listen. Even employees slowed down. Everyone sensed the confrontation growing. Keanu folded his newspaper. I needed a room, Jason smirked. Just a room? Yes, the answer frustrated him. Because Keanu refused to play the game, refused to become angry, refused to fight. Yet Jason kept pushing. You know, he glanced around the lobby, we have plenty of budget hotels nearby. Emily finally stepped forward. Jason. His eyes never left Keanu. I think this conversation is inappropriate. Jason looked annoyed. No one asked you. Emily crossed her arms. I'm asking you to stop. Several guests nodded quietly. A businessman near the bar whispered, she's right. But Jason felt trapped. The rumors had gotten out of control. Half the hotel seemed fascinated by this man, and Jason wanted control back. So instead of stopping, he doubled down. Look around. He gestured toward the lobby, the chandeliers, the marble floors, the luxury furnishings, the expensive guests.
This place isn't for everyone.
The statement landed heavily. Gasps appeared from nearby guests. Even some people who had laughed earlier now looked uncomfortable. Keanu studied Jason for a moment. Not angry, not offended, just thoughtful. Then he asked quietly, what do you mean? Jason answered immediately. I mean, some places have standards. Emily closed her eyes. Michael looked horrified. The elderly woman Keanu had helped earlier shook her head. The entire lobby seemed to cringe. Yet Jason continued. You asked for the cheapest room. Silence. You arrived with one backpack. More silence. You don't exactly look like our typical guest. The words echoed through the lobby. People stared. Phones rose slightly higher. Everyone knew Jason was crossing a line, a very big line. Keanu remained seated, calm as ever. The contrast made Jason look even worse. One wealthy guest finally spoke. Maybe that's enough. Jason looked over, embarrassed, but not enough to stop, because now he felt committed. Now he needed to prove he was right. He turned back toward Keanu and asked the question that shocked everyone. Can you even afford to stay here? The lobby froze. Completely, a woman near the elevators covered her mouth. Michael looked sick. Emily stepped forward instantly. Jason, stop. Her voice was firm, louder than before. Jason ignored her. The manager's face had grown red. Years of assumptions, years of judging people, years of equating appearance with worth. Everything was pouring out. And he couldn't stop himself. We're not a charity. The words echoed through the lobby. Several guests openly winced. The elderly woman looked furious. A businessman shook his head. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody found this amusing. Now it was simply cruel, and everyone knew it, except Jason. Keanu slowly stood, not aggressively, not angrily, simply standing. His calm presence somehow filled the entire lobby. Jason suddenly felt less confident. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Keanu looked around. At the guests, at the employees, at Emily. Then back at Jason, his voice remained gentle. Are you asking me to leave? For a brief moment, Jason had an opportunity, a chance to walk away, a chance to apologize, a chance to end the situation. But pride wouldn't let him. Too many people were watching. Too many people had heard him. So instead of backing down, he made the biggest mistake of the night. If you can't afford this hotel, he paused. The silence felt unbearable. Then he finished the sentence. Maybe you should. Gasps swept through the lobby. Emily looked stunned. Michael stared in disbelief. Even the guests who once laughed now seemed embarrassed. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Jason. And somehow that silence felt heavier than any argument. Then, very calmly, very quietly, Keanu slipped one hand into his jacket pocket and the entire lobby held its breath. Keanu's hand slipped calmly into his jacket pocket. The entire lobby seemed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the soft piano music, playing through the hotel speakers, suddenly felt distant. Jason stood in front of him, arms folded, trying to look confident, trying to convince himself he was still in control. But deep inside, something felt wrong, very wrong. Because the man standing in front of him wasn't angry, wasn't embarrassed, wasn't defensive. Most people would have exploded by now. Most people would have demanded a manager. Most people would have created a scene. Keanu simply remained calm, as if he had nothing to prove. The silence stretched. Guests watched. Employees watched. Phones remained pointed toward the scene. Then suddenly, the revolving doors opened. A rush of cool night air entered the lobby. Several guests turned automatically. A black luxury sedan had just pulled up outside. The doorman immediately straightened. Two security personnel entered first. Then an older gentleman stepped through the doors, tall, distinguished, perfectly tailored suit, silver hair, confident presence. The moment employees saw him, their posture changed, because everyone knew exactly who he was. Richard Harrison, owner of the Grand Crescent Hotel, a man who rarely visited without notice. And when he did, something important was usually happening. The front desk staff immediately stood straighter. Bellhops adjusted their uniforms. Managers became nervous. including Jason, especially Jason, Mr. Harrison. Several employees greeted him. Richard offered a polite nod, but something instantly caught his attention. The atmosphere felt strange, too quiet, too tense. Guests weren't talking. Employees looked uncomfortable. Half the lobby appeared focused on one location. Richard followed their gaze, toward Keanu, toward Jason, toward the center of the confrontation. His eyes narrowed slightly, then landed on Keanu's face. Everything changed. Immediately, a smile appeared, a genuine smile. Not the polite corporate smile employees usually saw, a real one. Without hesitation, Richard began walking. Straight through the lobby, straight past the front desk, straight past Jason, straight toward Keanu. Guests noticed immediately. Whispers spread. Where's he going? Does he know him? What's happening? Jason frowned. Confusion appeared on his face. Richard didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, didn't even glance at anyone else. His attention remained fixed on one person, Keanu Reeves. He reached him. Richard extended both hands warmly. Keanu, the lobby froze. Completely, a woman near the elevators gasped. Several phones lowered. Michael nearly dropped the luggage cart he was holding. Emily's eyes widened. The mystery was over. Richard laughed warmly. It's been too long, Keanu smiled. Good to see you too, Richard. They shook hands. Not like strangers, not like celebrity and fan, like old friends, real friends. The shock hit the lobby like a wave. A businessman whispered, "Oh my God," the elderly woman smiled immediately. I knew it. Guests stared openly now. No more whispers, no more guessing, no more rumors. The quiet man from room 214 really was Keanu Reeves. Jason felt his stomach drop. Every insult replayed inside his head, every sarcastic comment, every public humiliation, every assumption, every laugh, all of it, one after another. Richard looked around, slowly, carefully. Then his smile faded slightly. Something wasn't right. He knew Keanu, and he knew people. Years of experience taught him how to read a room. Tonight the room looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. His eyes moved toward Jason, then Emily, then the silent guests, then back to Keanu. What happened here? Nobody answered. Not immediately. The silence became heavy. Jason suddenly found himself unable to speak. Emily looked down. Michael avoided eye contact. Several guests exchanged awkward glances. Richard looked back toward Keanu. You okay? Keanu smiled softly. I'm fine. That answer somehow made the situation worse, because he wasn't complaining, wasn't accusing anyone, wasn't trying to get anyone in trouble. Even now, after everything, Richard studied him carefully, then looked toward Jason. What happened? This time his voice carried more weight, more authority. Jason swallowed hard. For the first time all evening, confidence abandoned him. His mouth opened. Nothing came out, because suddenly every excuse sounded ridiculous. Every assumption sounded foolish. The truth stood exposed in the middle of the lobby. He hadn't judged Keanu because of who he was. He judged him because of how he looked, because of his jacket, because of his boots, because he asked for the cheapest room. And now everyone knew it. The realization hit harder than any punishment ever could. Across the lobby, whispers returned. But now they sounded different. People weren't talking about Keanu anymore. They were talking about Jason, and Jason could feel it. The embarrassment, the regret, the shame, all growing stronger with every passing second. Richard looked toward the front desk, then toward room 214's keycard still sitting in Jason's system. His expression darkened. You put Keanu in the old wing? The question landed like a hammer. Jason lowered his eyes. Richard didn't need an answer. He already knew. The owner looked around the lobby one final time, then back at Keanu, and suddenly everyone realized the same thing. The story wasn't over, not even close. Because if Richard Harrison knew Keanu Reeves personally, there was probably a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was about to change everything. For several moments, nobody moved. The Grand Crescent Hotel lobby remained completely silent. Guests continued staring. Employees stood frozen. Even Jason seemed unable to process what had just happened. The quiet traveler he mocked, the man he assigned to the worst room, the guest he publicly humiliated, was Keanu Reeves. And not only that, the hotel owner clearly considered him a friend, a close friend. Richard Harrison looked around the lobby, then toward Keanu. Finally, he sighed. Let's go somewhere private. Keanu nodded. Sounds good. A few minutes later, they sat inside one of the hotel's executive conference rooms. Jason sat near the end of the table. Emily sat nearby. Michael stood quietly against the wall. Richard wanted answers. And so did everyone else. The owner folded his hands, then looked toward Keanu. I owe you an apology. Keanu smiled. You don't owe me anything. Richard shook his head. This hotel carries my name. The room became quiet. Then something unexpected happened. Richard's expression changed. The embarrassment disappeared, replaced by concern. Real concern. The kind that had nothing to do with Jason, or the lobby, or what happened tonight. Keanu noticed immediately. Something's wrong. Richard sighed heavily. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he nodded. Actually, his voice lowered. There is. The room became still. Jason looked up. Emily leaned forward. Even Michael seemed curious. Richard rubbed his forehead. The scholarship program. Keanu's expression changed slightly. What about it? The owner looked exhausted. Corporate funding collapsed last month. Silence. Keanu frowned. What happened? Richard opened a folder sitting beside him. Several reports spilled across the table. Financial statements, budget forecasts, program records. The mood inside the room instantly shifted. This wasn't about a hotel anymore. This was something bigger, much bigger. Richards sighed again. You remember why we started the program? Keanu nodded. Of course he did. Years earlier, the Grand Crescent Hotel had created a scholarship program for hospitality workers, bellhops, receptionists, housekeepers, restaurant employees, students trying to build careers in hotels and tourism, people who couldn't afford expensive education, people who simply needed a chance. Richard turned several pages. The foundation lost 2 major donors. The room remained silent. The economy hit some of our partners hard. He looked down. We've been trying to keep things running. Then came the difficult part, but we're almost out of money. Nobody spoke. Not immediately. Because suddenly, tonight's conflict seemed very small compared to what Richard was describing. The owner continued. If we don't find funding soon, his voice weakened. The program ends. The words landed heavily, especially for Michael, because he knew exactly what that meant. His face turned pale. Keanu noticed instantly. Richard noticed too. The owner looked toward him. Michael. The young bellhop swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Richard offered a sad smile. You're one of the students receiving support. The room grew quiet again. Jason looked surprised. Emily looked shocked. Keanu listened carefully. Michael stared at the floor, embarrassed, nervous, vulnerable. Richard continued. Michael's tuition is covered through the program. The young bellhop finally spoke. My community college. His voice was barely above a whisper. Without the scholarship, he knew what would happen. No tuition, no A-class, no degree, no future. Richard looked away. The same situation applies to 12 other students. Emily gasped softly. 12? Richard nodded. Maybe more. Suddenly the room felt much heavier, because now there were faces attached to the problem. Real people, real futures, real dreams, not numbers on a spreadsheet. Michael wasn't the only one struggling. A housekeeper's daughter depended on the program. A restaurant worker's son depended on it. Several employees had built their futures around support that might disappear within weeks. Keanu leaned back quietly, listening, thinking. The room remained silent. Then Emily asked, How long do we have? Richard answered honestly. Not long. The words felt devastating. Jason looked around the room. For the first time all evening, he wasn't thinking about himself, or his embarrassment, or his mistake. He was thinking about Michael, the same bellhop he barely noticed most days, the same young employee struggling to build a better life. A new kind of guilt appeared inside him, because suddenly tonight wasn't about Keanu anymore. It was about people. People whose futures hung in the balance. Richard closed the folder. The board meets next month. Silence. If funding isn't secured by then. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. The scholarship program would disappear. Michael lowered his eyes. Keanu watched him carefully. The same young bellhop he encouraged earlier. The same young man trying desperately to succeed. And now his future was uncertain. Outside the conference room window, New York City glowed beneath the night sky. Traffic moved through the streets. People hurried home. Life continued as normal. But inside the Grand Crescent Hotel, a much bigger problem had just revealed itself. The humiliation in the lobby suddenly seemed insignificant. Because now there was something worth fighting for, something worth saving. And although nobody in the room realized it yet, the solution to that problem was sitting quietly among them, listening, watching, saying very little, just as he always did, because the real reason Keanu Reeves had come to the Grand Crescent Hotel wasn't what anyone thought. And the truth behind that reason was about to change lives, not just one life. Many. The second story had begun, and its reveal would be far more powerful than anyone expected. The conference room remained silent. Nobody seemed eager to speak. Not after everything they had just learned. The scholarship program was dying. Students could lose their education. Employees could lose opportunities. And people like Michael would see years of hard work disappear overnight. Richard Harrison stared at the financial reports spread across the table. The weight of responsibility showed on his face. For the first time all evening, the successful hotel owner looked defeated. "I've tried everything." His voice sounded tired. "We cut expenses. We contacted former donors. We delayed projects. We bought time." He sighed heavily. "But we're running out of options." The room fell silent again. Michael lowered his eyes. The young bellhop looked devastated. Emily noticed. So did Keanu. The actor had been unusually quiet during the entire discussion, listening, observing, thinking, just as he always did. Richard rubbed his forehead. "The worst part's calling these students." His voice cracked slightly, telling them their future might disappear. Nobody knew what to say, because some problems are bigger than words. Michael finally spoke. His voice was barely audible. "My mom already works 2 jobs. The room turned toward him. He swallowed hard. "Without the scholarship, I can't stay in school." Silence. "My family can't afford it." Emily looked emotional. Jason stared at the table. The words hit harder than he expected. Because Michael wasn't asking for luxury, wasn't asking for special treatment. He simply wanted a chance to build a better life, the same chance everyone deserved. Richard looked at him sadly. "I know," Michael nodded, then forced a smile. "I'll figure something out." But everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The fear, the disappointment, the hopelessness. Across the table, Keanu quietly leaned back in his chair. Then something unexpected happened. Richard suddenly laughed, a strange laugh. The kind people make when remembering something important. Everyone looked toward him. "What?" Emily asked. Richard shook his head. "It's funny. Nobody understood." The owner smiled toward Keanu. "You know, they still don't know." Keanu immediately knew what he meant, and instantly looked uncomfortable. Richard laughed again. "There it is." "What?" Jason asked. Richard pointed toward Keanu. That look, the room became curious. "What look?" Michael asked. Richard smiled. "The look he always gets when someone starts talking about the things he's done." Keanu rubbed the back of his neck, almost embarrassed. "Richard." The owner ignored him. "No." Richard leaned forward. "I think it's time." Keanu sighed. The room grew quiet. Very quiet, because suddenly everyone sensed something important was coming. Richard looked toward Michael, then Emily, then Jason. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know who started the scholarship program?" Emily answered first. "The hotel." Richard smiled. "Not exactly." Nobody understood. The owner opened another folder, a much older one. Inside were documents, letters, agreements, financial records, years of records. He placed them carefully on the table, then slid them toward Michael. "Read the first page." Michael looked confused, but obeyed. As he read, his eyes widened, then widened even more. His hands started shaking. Emily leaned closer. "What is it?" Michael looked up, speechless. Richard smiled. "Go ahead." Michael swallowed hard. "The original donor." His voice trembled. "The person who funded the program." He looked directly at Keanu. "No way." Emily grabbed the document. "Read it." Then covered her mouth. Jason stared. "What?" Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with shock. It was Keanu. Silence. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Richard nodded slowly. From the beginning, the room felt frozen. Michael looked at Keanu, then at the document, then back again, as if his brain refused to believe what he was reading. "You funded the scholarship?" Keanu smiled softly. "A little." Richard laughed. "A little?" He shook his head. "Try almost all of it." The room exploded with disbelief. Jason stared in shock. Emily couldn't stop reading the records. Michael looked emotional. And Keanu looked like he wanted to disappear. Not because he regretted helping. Because he hated attention. Richard continued. 8 years ago, the hotel wanted to create opportunities for hospitality workers. We had the idea. He pointed toward Keanu. He made it possible. Nobody spoke. The revelation was too big, too unexpected. Richard opened another document. Tuition assistance. Another. Emergency family grants. Another. Educational support. Another. Medical hardship relief. Page after page, year after year. Quiet generosity. Hidden generosity. Life-changing generosity. Michael looked stunned. "You paid for all this?" Keanu shrugged. I helped. Richard laughed. That's the understatement of the century. The owner stood, then walked toward a cabinet. Inside sat dozens of letters. Hundreds, actually. He placed a stack on the table. Read them. Emily picked up one. A young woman thanked the program for helping her become a hotel manager. Michael opened another. A former dishwasher thanked the scholarship for helping him graduate college. Jason read one. A single mother describing how emergency support prevented her family from becoming homeless. Letter after letter. Story after story, life after life, changed not by publicity, not by headlines, not by social media, by quiet acts of kindness. Richard smiled sadly. The best part? He looked toward Keanu. Most of these people don't even know who helped them. The room became emotional, because suddenly everything made sense. The kindness, the patience, the humility, the way Keanu treated employees, the way he helped strangers, the way he never complained. This wasn't an act. This wasn't public relations. This was simply who he was. Michael looked down at one letter, then another. Finally, he asked, why? The question hung in the air. Everyone wanted the answer. Keanu thought for a moment, then smiled. When I was younger, people helped me. The room listened carefully. Sometimes they gave me opportunities. Sometimes they gave me advice. Sometimes they simply believed in me. His voice remained calm. They changed my life. Michael nodded slowly. Keanu continued. I figured if someone helped me, he smiled. Maybe I should help somebody else. The simplicity of the answer somehow made it more powerful. No grand speech. No dramatic explanation. Just kindness. Richard shook his head. You forgot the emergency fund. Keanu sighed. Richard. The owner ignored him again. 3 years ago, a housekeeper's husband needed surgery. Emily looked surprised. Richard nodded. The family couldn't afford it. He pointed toward Keanu. He paid for everything. Another shock. Another revelation. Then another. A front desk employee whose home burned down. A restaurant worker facing eviction. A bellhop whose daughter needed treatment. Every story led back to the same person. Quietly. Secretly. Without recognition. Without credit. Without applause. Jason felt sick. Not because of what Keanu had done. Because of what he had done. The contrast was overwhelming. He judged a man based on his clothes. Meanwhile, that same man had spent years helping people. People exactly like Michael. People exactly like hotel employees. People Jason often overlooked. Richard finally revealed the last piece. The reason Keanu came here tonight wasn't for a room. Everyone looked up. What? Emily asked. Richard smiled. He came to review the scholarship program. The room froze again. Keanu nodded. I had a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning. Michael stared. You came here because of us? Keanu smiled. Of course. The young bellhop's eyes filled with tears. For the first time all evening, nobody saw a movie star. Nobody saw a celebrity. They saw something much more powerful. A genuinely good man. A man who helped others when nobody was watching. A man who changed lives without asking for recognition. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something important. Character mattered more than status. Kindness mattered more than wealth. And the people who seem ordinary often carry extraordinary hearts. The room remained silent. Not because there was nothing to say, because some truths are too powerful for words. The conference room remained quiet. Nobody seemed eager to speak. Not after everything they had learned. The scholarship program, the emergency fund, the tuition support, the years of quiet generosity. Every revelation had pointed to the same person, Keanu Reeves. And somehow, the man responsible for changing so many lives sat calmly at the table as if none of it were extraordinary. Jason couldn't stop staring at the documents. Letter after letter, story after story, people helped. Families saved. Dreams protected. Meanwhile, his own memories replayed in painful detail. The cheapest room, the sarcastic comments, the laughter, the public humiliation. Every word felt worse now, much worse. Because he finally understood something. Keanu never gave him a reason to treat him badly. Not one. The problem had never been Keanu. The problem had been Jason. His assumptions, his prejudice, his obsession with status, his belief that appearance determined value. The realization hurt, more than any punishment could. Richard eventually stood. We should return to the lobby. Everyone agreed. Slowly, the group left the conference room. As they entered the lobby, guests immediately noticed. Whispers spread again. Employees stopped working for a moment. Everyone wanted to know what happened. The rumors had already traveled throughout the hotel. Most people knew Keanu Reeves was staying there. Few knew the rest. Yet that changed quickly. Employees began hearing the story, the scholarship program, the donations, the students, the families, the emergency support. Every new detail spread across the building. Housekeepers whispered about it. Bellhops discussed it. Receptionists shared the story. The reaction was always the same. Shock, then admiration, then silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they misjudged someone. Jason walked through the lobby, feeling every pair of eyes on him. Some guests recognized him. Some employees had witnessed everything earlier. Nobody needed to say anything. Their expressions said enough. Jason wasn't angry, wasn't defensive. For the first time all evening, he simply felt ashamed. The elderly woman Keanu helped earlier sat near the fireplace. As Jason passed, she looked at him, not with anger, not with hatred, with disappointment. That somehow felt worse, much worse. Across the lobby, Michael spoke quietly with another employee. His future had nearly disappeared. Yet the man Jason mocked had spent years protecting opportunities for people exactly like him. The irony was impossible to ignore. Jason stopped near the front desk, the same place where everything started, the same counter where he laughed, the same counter where he judged a stranger. Now it felt different, almost unfamiliar. Emily approached quietly. For a moment neither spoke. Then Jason finally broke the silence. "I was wrong," Emily nodded. Yes, there was no anger in her voice, only honesty. Jason looked toward Keanu, standing across the lobby, talking with Michael, listening carefully, giving the young bellhop his full attention, just like he always did. Jason sighed. "I kept waiting for him to get angry." Emily smiled softly. "He never was going to." Jason laughed sadly. "I know. The truth hurt, because anger would have been easier. A fight would have been easier. Instead, Keanu responded to cruelty with kindness, and that forced Jason to confront himself. No excuses, no distractions, just truth. For years, Jason believed successful people looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, spent money a certain way. Tonight shattered that belief. The man with the worn jacket turned out to be the most generous person in the building. The man who asked for the cheapest room had quietly paid for students' futures. The guest Jason dismissed had shown more class than anyone else in the hotel, including him, especially him. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Not because he feared losing his job, not because guests witnessed the situation, but because he genuinely regretted it. He regretted becoming the kind of person who judged first and understood later, the kind of person who saw clothing before character, money before humanity, status before dignity. Across the room, Richard watched him carefully. The owner understood what was happening. This wasn't humiliation anymore. This was reflection, growth, the painful kind. And sometimes that was more powerful than punishment. Jason slowly looked around the lobby. The marble floors, the chandeliers, the expensive furniture, all the things he once believed made a place important. Tonight he finally understood what actually mattered. People, character, kindness, respect. The things Keanu demonstrated all evening. The things Jason forgot. For the first time in years, he wanted to change. Not because someone demanded it, because he needed to. Because deep down, he no longer liked the person he had been. And that realization marked the beginning of something new. Not revenge, not consequences. Something much harder. Becoming better. The next morning, sunlight poured through the massive windows of the Grand Crescent Hotel. The storm was gone. The city looked brighter. And somehow, so did the people inside the hotel. Guests moved through the lobby. Employees started their shifts. Life continued. But something had changed, especially for Jason Miller. He stood near the front desk waiting quietly, more nervous than he had been in years. Eventually, Keanu appeared. Simple jacket, simple backpack, the same calm smile, the same quiet presence. Jason took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves." Keanu looked up. "Good morning." Jason hesitated. For a moment, words failed him. Then he finally spoke. "I owe you an apology." The lobby became quiet. Several employees looked over. Jason continued. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." His voice was sincere. "I looked at your clothes, your room choice, your appearance, and I decided who you were." He lowered his eyes. "I was wrong." Keanu listened silently. Jason swallowed. "I treated you unfairly. I embarrassed you. And despite all of that, you treated everyone here with kindness." The manager shook his head. "I wish I had done the same." For several seconds, silence filled the lobby. Then Keanu smiled, a genuine smile. "It's okay." Jason looked surprised. "No, it isn't." Keanu nodded gently. "Maybe not." Then he added, "But people can change." The words hit harder than any lecture, because they carried no anger, no revenge, no bitterness, only grace. Jason felt emotion rising in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Richard soon joined them, and with him came good news. Very good news. The scholarship program would continue. Funding had been secured. Students like Michael would remain in school. Their futures were safe. When Michael heard the news, he could barely speak. The young bellhop smiled through tears. Years of uncertainty disappeared in a single moment. His dream remained alive. Emily also received unexpected recognition. Richard publicly praised her professionalism, her kindness, her willingness to stand up for what was right. Within months, she received a promotion, one she earned completely. But perhaps the biggest change happened throughout the hotel itself. New employee training programs were introduced. Respect became a core value. Staff were reminded that every guest deserved dignity, not because of wealth, not because of status, because they were human beings. Jason embraced those changes more than anyone. Whenever a guest walked through the doors, he reminded himself of one simple lesson: never assume, never judge, never decide someone's worth based on appearance, because the most extraordinary people often look ordinary. Months later, guests noticed something different about the Grand Crescent Hotel. The atmosphere felt warmer, kinder, more welcoming, and in many ways that change began with one uncomfortable night, one mistake, one lesson. As Keanu prepared to leave, Michael approached him one final time. "Thank you." Keanu smiled. "For what?" Michael laughed softly. "You know exactly what." Keanu smiled again, then shook his hand. The young bellhop would never forget that moment. Neither would Jason. Neither would Emily. Because sometimes the people we underestimate reveal who we truly are. Respect should never depend on money, or clothes, or status. The strongest people don't demand respect, they give it. And the people who seem ordinary often carry extraordinary character. The end.